August 9, 1942, at 0237 hours, in the black silence before dawn, the first wave of United States Marines began wading ashore on a strip of beach forever etched into history. Red Beach 2 on Guadalcanal in the Solomon Islands. They carried the standard weapons of the day. Moe Goron Rifles, Browning Automatic Rifles, Thompson Schumathinagunsch. But among those weapons was something unusual, something that would catch the Japanese completely off guard. Hidden in the hands of select Marines was the Winchester Model 12 shotgun, a pump-action weapon originally designed for hunting, but now turned into one of the most devastating tools of close combat ever fielded in modern warfare. The Japanese defenders on Guadalcanal had prepared for rifle combat at a distance. They trained endlessly for bayonet charges and close-in sword fighting, convinced their warrior spirit would overwhelm American troops in hand-to-hand combat. What they had not prepared for was the brutal reality of American shotguns. Weapons that could fire as fast as a man could pump the action. The mechanical simplicity of the Model 12, combined with its devastating spread of buckshot, would unravel Japanese tactical doctrine in the jungles, caves, and night fighting of the Pacific War. The numbers alone told the story. Each shell held 9.33 caliber pellets of double-aught buckshot. A Marine firing 6 rounds in 3 seconds with the Model 12 could unleash 54 projectiles, saturating an area with lethal firepower faster than any Japanese soldier could dream of achieving with a bolt-action Arisaka rifle. For the 2,100 Japanese defenders on Guadalcanal, this was a weapon they had never expected to face, one so devastating that Germany had actually tried to have it banned during World War I. The Germans had filed a formal diplomatic protest in 1918, claiming that American shotguns violated the Hague Convention because they caused unnecessary suffering. Their protest even threatened that any captured U.S. soldier carrying a shotgun could be executed on the spot. The United States dismissed the protest, warning that if a single American was executed for carrying a shotgun, reprisals would follow. No Americans were ever executed, and the shotgun remained in service. By the time World War II began, the Winchester Model 12 trench gun had been refined for military use. It had a shortened 51-centimeter barrel, a heat shield, a bayonet lug, and most importantly, it retained the ability to slam fire. That meant a Marine could hold down the trigger and simply pump the action as fast as his arms could move, firing shell after shell in a near-continuous roar of destruction. For the Japanese, who relied on night fighting and close-in bayonet charges, this was a nightmare weapon. Japanese military manuals had emphasized that Americans were weak in close combat and dependent on long-range firepower. Their doctrine called for night infiltration, surprise attacks, and the belief that spiritual superiority would win against Western forces. Early victories in China, Singapore, and the Philippines seemed to confirm this belief. But when they met American Marines carrying shotguns on Guadalcanal, those assumptions collapsed. The test came just 14 days after the landing. During the Battle of the Tenere River on August 23, 1942, Colonel Kaineo Ichiki led nearly 900 Japanese soldiers in a night assault across a sandbar, intending to smash through the Marine perimeter. It was exactly the kind of close combat the Japanese doctrine glorified. But waiting for them were Marines armed with machine guns, artillery, and in the shadows, shotgun-armed riflemen. As the Japanese surged forward, they were met with a storm of fire. Marines fired Garens and bars into the masses. But in the deadly close-in fighting along the riverbank, the Winchester Model 12 came into its own. At ranges of 20 yards or less, a single shotgun blast tore through multiple attackers at once. Slam-firing Marines turned their weapons into rapid-fire cannons. When dawn broke, the sandbar was littered with bodies. Of the 892 Japanese who began the charge, nearly 774 lay dead. The effectiveness of the shotgun wasn't just in its killing power, but also in its psychological effect. In the darkness of the jungle, the sound of a pump-action cycling, the sharp metallic cha-chunk, sent shivers down Japanese infiltrator spines. Marines used the weapon in ways that rifles simply couldn't match. On night patrols, the shotgun became the weapon of the pointman, delivering immediate devastating firepower at the first sign of an ambush. In defensive perimeters, Marines loaded their shotguns and waited in the blackness. When Japanese infiltrators crawled silently toward the lines with bayonets and grenades, one blast of buckshot ended the attack instantly. As the war dragged on into 1943 and 1944, the shotgun proved itself again and again. In the jungles of New Georgia, Marines gave their point men the Winchester Model 12 specifically to counter ambushes. A single blast could break up a Japanese patrol before it had a chance to strike. At night, shotgun-armed Marines were stationed in overlapping fields of fire, turning infiltration attempts into suicide missions. The weapon also became a tool for jungle lane shooting. Marines would fire down trails or into vegetation where Japanese soldiers might be hiding, the spread of buckshot tearing through foliage and hitting hidden targets. But perhaps the most terrifying use of the Model 12 came in cave and bunker warfare. Starting at Tarawa in November 1943 and reaching its brutal peak at Iwo Jima in Okinawa, the Japanese turned entire islands into fortresses of rock, coral, and concrete. Marines had to crawl into caves, crawl up ridges, and fight enemies hidden in dark chambers. Here, the shotgun was unmatched. Marines developed the technique of firing into cave mouths, letting the buckshot ricochet off walls, creating a deadly storm inside confined spaces. Survivors described the noise as horrifying. Ricocheting pellets whined and screamed in every direction, making it seem like death came from all around, even when it didn't kill outright. The psychological terror often forced Japanese soldiers to abandon positions. On Saipan in June 1944, during the largest Japanese banzai charge of the war, thousands of Japanese soldiers hurled themselves at American lines. While machine guns and artillery inflicted the bulk of casualties, the chaos of closing in fighting saw shotgun-armed Marines holding the line in desperate moments. Their ability to unleash clouds of lead into charging soldiers made the difference in sectors where the enemy briefly broke through. On Iwo Jima, the shotgun became part of blowtorch and corkscrew tactics. Flamethrowers provided fire and smoke. Demolition charges sealed tunnels, and shotguns delivered the killing blow inside fortifications. Marines even developed skip shooting, deliberately bouncing buckshot off tunnel walls to hit enemies hiding around corners. Despite its effectiveness, the Model 12 was never mass-issued. Only about 59,000 were produced during the war, a tiny number compared to millions of rifles. They were given to units most likely to need them. Marines and rifle companies, Army assault teams, Navy landing parties, even Air Force guards defending airfields. Ammunition, however, was plentiful. Millions of shells were produced, including standard buckshot, solid slugs for longer range, and smaller shot for clearing vegetation. For the Marines who carried them, the Model 12 was a weapon of choice. Some preferred rifles, but many swore by the shotgun's ability to dominate close combat. Veterans recalled the confidence it gave them at night, knowing that if the Japanese came close, they had the ultimate weapon waiting. The Japanese, for their part, never found a real counter. They experimented with crude body armor made from wood or bamboo, but it was heavy, awkward, and largely ineffective. Their only real defense was to try to avoid getting close enough. But their entire doctrine relied on close attacks. The story of the Model 12 is not just about hardware. It reflects the American approach to war. Pragmatic, adaptable, and willing to use any tool that worked. Where other armies clung to tradition, the Marines embraced innovation. They didn't wait for top-down doctrine. They experimented in the field, learned what worked, and passed it along. Techniques like skip shooting, mixed ammunition loads, and shotgun assault teams weren't invented in laboratories. They were born in the jungles and caves of the Pacific by Marines trying to survive. By war's end, the shotgun had carved out a fearsome reputation. It was never the main weapon of the war, but in the specific, brutal environments of the Pacific, it was irreplaceable. In night fighting, jungle patrols, bunker assaults, and desperate last stands, the Winchester Model 12 gave Marines and soldiers a weapon that shattered Japanese tactical assumptions. Even after the war, its legacy lived on. The Model 12 served in Korea, where once again it proved itself in night fighting. In Vietnam, shotguns were issued to point men patrolling dense jungles and for tunnel fighting, echoing the cave-clearing days of World War II. Its influence carried forward into modern military shotguns, and its philosophy, overwhelming close-range firepower, can still be seen in weapons like the A-10 Warthog and the AC-130 gunship. For the Japanese soldiers who faced it, the Model 12 was more than just a weapon. It was a terrifying contradiction of everything they had believed. They expected Western soldiers to falter in close combat. Instead, they found themselves shredded by blasts of buckshot in the dark jungle or inside caves. The shotgun, simple yet devastating, proved that American forces could adapt faster, innovate smarter, and fight with overwhelming firepower at every range. From Guadalcanal to Okinawa, the Winchester Model 12 became synonymous with Marine Corps close combat superiority. Japanese commanders, accustomed to dominating night, fighting through infiltration and surprise, found their tactical advantages neutralized. The pump action's distinctive sound became an auditory warning that death approached. Unlike the sharp crack of rifle fire, the shotgun's deep boom and the metallic cycling of the action created a unique acoustic signature. In the suffocating darkness of Pacific jungles, this sound preceded carnage. Japanese night raiders, who had terrorized Allied forces in earlier campaigns, now hesitated before advancing. The knowledge that American positions might be defended by shotgun-armed Marines transformed their aggressive doctrine into cautious probing. This psychological shift cannot be overstated. Where once Japanese infantry confidently closed distance under cover of darkness, they now approached with dread, uncertain whether the next sound would be that fatal pump-action cycle. The weapon's versatility extended beyond pure combat applications. In the chaotic environment of amphibious landings, where combat distances collapsed to mere feet, the shotgun provided Marines with instant firepower that didn't require precise aim. The spread pattern meant that in the confusion of smoke, explosions, and screaming men, a Marine could swing toward a threat and fire with reasonable certainty of hitting the target. This capability saved countless lives during the brutal beach assaults that characterized Pacific Island warfare. At Peleliu, in September 1944, Marines clearing Japanese bunkers discovered another advantage. The buckshot spread pattern meant that multiple enemy soldiers occupying a single bunker could be engaged with one shot. Where a rifleman might need to identify and target each defender individually, a shotgun-armed Marine could fire once and effectively neutralize an entire position. This efficiency proved critical in the rapid tempo of combat operations where hesitation meant death. The weapon also served a purpose that few recognized. In situations where civilians might be present or when identifying combatants from non-combatants proved difficult, the shotgun's limited range and spread pattern reduced the risk of unintended casualties beyond the immediate engagement area. Unlike rifle rounds that could travel hundreds of yards and strike unintended targets, buckshot's effectiveness diminished rapidly beyond 50 yards, providing Marines with a weapon that was devastatingly lethal at close range, but less likely to cause collateral damage at distance. American innovation extended to ammunition development. Beyond standard buckshot loads, specialized rounds were created for specific tactical situations. Flechette rounds, containing dozens of small dart-like projectiles, were tested for jungle warfare applications. Breaching rounds for destroying door hinges and locks gave assault teams new capabilities. Incendiary rounds for setting fire to Japanese positions in dense vegetation proved effective in certain combat scenarios. This continuous refinement demonstrated the American military's commitment to maximizing every weapon system's potential. The contrast with Japanese weapons development was stark. While American forces experimented, adapted, and improved their equipment based on battlefield feedback, Japanese military doctrine remained relatively static. Their Arisaka rifles, though reliable, offered no significant advantages in the close combat environments that defined Pacific Island warfare. Japanese submachine guns existed in limited numbers and never achieved the battlefield saturation necessary to counter American shotguns effectively. This inflexibility in doctrine and equipment meant that Japanese forces continued employing tactics that American shotguns had already proven obsolete. Training with the Model 12 evolved throughout the war. Initially, Marines received minimal instruction, often learning through combat experience. By 1944, formal shotgun training became standard at Marine Corps training facilities. Recruits practiced point-shooting techniques, learning to fire from the hip without using sights. They drilled on rapid reloading procedures, understanding that in close combat, the ability to keep the weapon fed was as critical as accuracy. Mock village exercises simulated the building-clearing operations that had become common in Pacific fighting, with shotgun-armed Marines learning to coordinate with riflemen and automatic weapons teams. This training paid dividends in combat effectiveness. Veterans from later Pacific campaigns demonstrated markedly superior shotgun employment compared to the initial Guadalcanal landings. They understood optimal engagement ranges, knew when to use buckshot versus slugs, and could maintain their weapons under the harshest conditions. The institutional knowledge accumulated through 3 years of combat created a generation of Marines who viewed the shotgun not as a secondary weapon, but as a primary combat tool for specific tactical environments. The psychological warfare dimension of the Winchester Model 12 deserves particular emphasis. Japanese soldiers interviewed after the war consistently mentioned the distinctive sound of American shotguns as a source of fear. One captured officer stated through interpreters that his men called the shotgun the meat grinder, and that its presence in American defensive positions caused his troops to request assignment to other sectors. This admission reveals how thoroughly the weapon had penetrated Japanese military consciousness. The sound preceded the devastation, creating anticipation of horror that unnerved even veteran Japanese soldiers. Marine Corps intelligence officers recognized this psychological advantage and occasionally exploited it. In some defensive positions, Marines would deliberately cycle shotgun actions during nighttime hours, even without targets, specifically to unsettle Japanese forces preparing for infiltration attempts. This acoustic intimidation, combined with periodic shotgun fire into suspected enemy assembly areas, disrupted Japanese attack preparations and degraded their combat effectiveness before engagements even commenced. The cultural clash between American pragmatism and Japanese martial ideology found its sharpest expression in attitudes toward the shotgun. Japanese military culture, steeped in samurai traditions and Bushido warrior codes, emphasized personal combat prowess and spiritual determination. The shotgun represented everything antithetical to this worldview, a weapon requiring no particular skill, offering no opportunity for martial excellence, simply delivering mechanical death. To Japanese officers trained in swordsmanship and hand-to-hand combat, the shotgun was dishonorable, a coward's weapon. Yet this moral judgment offered no protection against buckshot. The collision between ideology and reality left Japanese forces psychologically unprepared for a weapon their culture deemed beneath contempt, yet their bodies feared instinctively. American Marines, unburdened by such philosophical concerns, simply used what worked. This pragmatic approach to warfare extended beyond weapons to tactics, logistics, and strategy. Where Japanese forces often prioritized abstract concepts like honor and fighting spirit, American forces focused on concrete objectives like winning battles and minimizing casualties. The shotgun perfectly embodied this philosophical divide, a hunting weapon pressed into military service, effective not because of any noble pedigree, but because it killed efficiently at close range. The weapon's civilian origins actually enhanced its psychological impact. Japanese intelligence, aware that the Model 12 was fundamentally a commercial sporting shotgun, struggled to understand why American forces would bring such equipment to war. This confusion reflected a deeper misunderstanding of American industrial capacity and military philosophy. The United States could afford to manufacture specialized weapons for every tactical niche precisely because its industrial base was so vast. Japan, fighting with limited resources, had to make every weapon serve multiple purposes. The Americans could indulge in specialization, fielding shotguns for close combat, rifles for medium range, and machine guns for sustained fire. This abundance of appropriate tools for specific jobs gave American forces overwhelming tactical flexibility. The cave warfare of 1944-1945 represented the shotgun's finest hour. As Japanese defenders retreated into increasingly sophisticated underground fortifications, traditional weapons lost effectiveness. Rifles couldn't shoot around corners. Grenades could be thrown back. Flamethrowers had limited fuel. But shotguns, with their ability to bounce buckshot off cave walls and saturate confined spaces with lead, became indispensable. Marines developed a systematic approach to cave clearing that placed the shotgun at the center. First, a flamethrower would blast the entrance, consuming oxygen and forcing defenders deeper. Then, demolition charges would seal secondary exits, trapping occupants. Finally, shotgun-armed Marines would advance into the cave, firing systematically at walls and ceilings to create ricocheting buckshot that struck targets even in concealed positions. This procedure, refined through trial and error across dozens of islands, transformed cave clearing from a desperate gamble into a methodical process. Japanese defenders, recognizing the futility of cave defense against these tactics, increasingly chose death by suicide rather than face shotgun-armed Marines in confined spaces. The Model 12's role in these operations cannot be overstated. Captured Japanese documents from Okinawa specifically warned about American scattering guns and recommended abandoning cave positions once Marines with these weapons approached. This tactical adjustment, forced by shotgun effectiveness, actually benefited American forces by compelling Japanese defenders into the open where they could be engaged by riflemen and machine gunners. The weapon had become so dominant in its tactical niche that it reshaped enemy defensive doctrine. Technical problems with the Model 12 were relatively minor, but worth noting. The ejection port could admit sand and debris during beach landings, requiring Marines to shield the weapon or clear it frequently. The wooden stock, while durable, could crack under heavy use or exposure to moisture. The magazine capacity of 5 rounds meant that in sustained firefights, Marines needed to reload frequently. Yet these limitations were manageable and didn't significantly impair combat effectiveness. Marines learned to wrap exposed mechanisms in cloth during landings, to inspect and maintain stocks regularly, and to carry additional shells in readily accessible pouches. The weapon's simplicity meant that most problems could be addressed by unit armorers without requiring specialized parts or tools. The logistics of shotgun ammunition presented unique challenges. Unlike rifle cartridges, which were standardized across multiple weapon systems, shotgun shells were specific to the Model 12 and a few other shotguns in American service. This meant separate supply chains, distinct storage requirements, and specialized handling procedures. Shotgun shells, being larger and heavier than rifle rounds, occupied more cargo space relative to their number. A Marine carrying 200 rounds of rifle ammunition took up less space and weight than one carrying 50 shotgun shells. Yet the tactical benefits justified these logistical complications. Supply officers learned to preposition shotgun ammunition at forward areas where close combat was anticipated, ensuring that shotgun-armed Marines had adequate supplies without burdening the overall logistics network. The 59,000 Model 12 shotguns manufactured during the war were distributed strategically. Marine divisions received priority allocation, typically equipping 1 or 2 men per rifle squad with shotguns. Army airborne and Ranger units also received significant quantities. Navy shore parties and military police units were issued smaller numbers. This selective distribution ensured that shotguns reached units most likely to encounter close combat situations while avoiding waste on units that would rarely employ them. The distribution pattern reveals American military planning sophistication, recognizing that not every soldier needed every weapon type, but ensuring that specialists with the right tools were available when needed. Post-war analysis of shotgun effectiveness validated their battlefield employment. After-action reports consistently praised the weapon's performance in close combat. Casualty analysis suggested that shotgun-armed Marines suffered lower casualty rates in close-quarters fighting compared to riflemen, though definitive statistical proof remained elusive due to the chaotic nature of such engagements. What was clear was that units equipped with shotguns reported higher confidence levels and greater willingness to engage in close combat, a psychological advantage that translated into tactical success. The Model 12's influence on post-war military doctrine was substantial. The Korean War saw continued shotgun employment, with similar results. Night defensive positions in Korea often included shotgun-armed soldiers specifically to counter Chinese infiltration tactics. The weapon proved as effective against Chinese forces as it had against Japanese, demonstrating that its tactical advantages transcended any particular enemy. Vietnam brought new challenges and new applications. Tunnel warfare, reminiscent of Pacific cave fighting, once again showcased shotgun advantages. Tunnel rats, soldiers who volunteered to explore Viet Cong tunnel networks, invariably carried shotguns for the same reasons Marines had used them in Japanese caves, the ability to saturate confined spaces with lethal force. The Winchester Model 12 and its descendants became standard issue for these dangerous missions. Beyond tunnel fighting, shotguns found roles in jungle patrols, perimeter defense, and convoy security. The weapon's short range, once seen as a limitation, became an advantage in the dense Vietnamese jungle where engagement distances rarely exceeded 50 yards. Point men on patrols, walking ahead of their squads through dense vegetation, carried shotguns to deliver instant, devastating firepower when ambushes occurred. The confidence that came from carrying a weapon capable of immediately neutralizing threats within arm's reach made these dangerous assignments marginally more bearable. The evolution of shotgun ammunition continued through Vietnam. Flechette rounds, containing multiple small arrows, were widely issued for jungle fighting. These rounds could penetrate light vegetation that might deflect traditional buckshot, extending the shotgun's effective range in jungle environments. Specialized breaching rounds for destroying door hinges and locks became standard for urban operations. The continuous refinement of ammunition types demonstrated that the shotgun remained a vital combat tool decades after its World War II debut. Modern military shotguns, though often different models than the Winchester Model 12, owe their existence to lessons learned in the Pacific. The concept of the combat shotgun as a specialized weapon for close-quarters battle was validated and institutionalized through World War II experience. Current military shotguns are lighter, hold more ammunition, and feature modern materials, but their tactical employment remains fundamentally unchanged from what Marines discovered on Guadalcanal, devastating close-range firepower delivered rapidly. The story of the Winchester Model 12 in World War II ultimately illustrates broader truths about warfare and innovation. Success comes from matching weapons to tactical requirements, not from adhering to preconceived notions of what military equipment should be. The Marines who first carried shotguns into combat on Guadalcanal weren't following doctrine. They were solving problems with available tools. This pragmatic approach, this willingness to embrace unconventional solutions, characterized American military effectiveness throughout the war and beyond. Japanese forces, despite their courage and determination, were constrained by rigid doctrine and limited resources. They couldn't adapt quickly enough to counter American innovations like the combat shotgun. From Guadalcanal to Okinawa, the Winchester Model 12 proved that sometimes the simplest solution is the most effective, that hunting tools can become combat instruments, and that innovative employment matters more than sophisticated design. For the Japanese infantrymen who faced American shotguns in Pacific jungles and caves, the Model 12 represented a weapon they never imagined would slam fire through their lines with such merciless efficiency.